Alright, let's finally do this thing. Hey everyone, 𝗃𝗶𝗃𝗀𝗧𝗶 here, and today, welcome to, for the first time in a while, an episode of my review series where I take a look at multiple different games and review it from a full standpoint. And today, we are going to be covering Sonic Mania. Sonic Mania is Sonic's latest adventure racing to pretty much every modern gaming platform these days, and it's one of the two Sonic games releasing this year that I have been looking forward to analyzing for a while. It was revealed at the Sonic 25th anniversary party as a side game in celebration to Sonic's past. Sonic Mania basically strives to recreate the magic that was the entirety of Sonic's classic era. Similar to Sonic Generations, but specifically focusing on Sonic's classic days. Initially, I was both warm to this game, but I also had some gripes. My first knee-jerk impression to Mania was not the warmest at first, due to another celebration to Sonic's past. Again, these past few games we've had such a focus on Sonic's past and celebrating it that all my hype for the look at this thing from Sonic's past or look at this thing from the past is very little. This is where Mania stands towards me as a game. As a longtime Sonic fan who has spent most of his life playing this series, how does Sonic Mania stack out? Sonic Mania's gameplay strives to be the continuation to the original Sega Genesis games. Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, as well as Sonic CD2. If you've played those classic Sonic games, you know the usual moves. The running, the spin dash, the using momentum and speed as your greatest tools to progress, it's all pretty basic and standard. And Sonic Mania surprisingly exceeds this standard. The movement of Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles as characters has never felt so smooth in terms of a 2D Sonic. And this is very expected, but the way Mania handles it specifically in terms of the animations, the control, is so much better than I originally expected it to be. Playing as these characters feels different but yet the same, just as it was in the original games, and the way you use their abilities to progress is nailed right on the head. You would think this is so standard that I shouldn't even be gushing over it, but it's really crazy to play a Sonic game with this level of control again. Besides the control, the level design is the real winner of Mania. Mania decides to do something I've wanted to see with 2D Sonic. It takes the wide and open aspect of Sonic CD's level design, but it doesn't have the pinball physics that plagued CD. For the most part, it has a nice wide level design with lots of options of progression as well as plenty of things to find to help the game be more fun. One thing that I love that this game did is it not only brought back the element shields but actually had certain sections and scenarios that appropriately fit when each shield was found, like the fire shield being in a fire heavy area, or finding the water shield to help with platforming in the water areas. The small side elements of the game assist the main gameplay mostly, and even when there were small sections that had gameplay shakeups, they weren't dramatic shakeups but well enough gimmicks to help keep things fresh. The team that designed Sonic Mania knew what they were doing basically, and this is what I feel is Sonic Mania's strongest strength. It is a game that feels like a Sonic game, something I feel Sonic has struggled with lately in some games, and is a good way to refresh that feeling for playing a 2D Sonic game. The reason I felt this game wouldn't do anything for me in this area is because I have played so much of 2D Sonic, from the original Genesis games themselves to the huge community of great 2D Sonic fan games. My fear was that the gameplay would bank on the design of older games alone to carry its appeal, and would get buried among the other options. But this game managed to have its own identity in its game design. Another thing I give the game credit for in design is that it has some of the most fun and well-designed bosses in Sonic. Rather than mostly being an Eggman bash fest all the time, the game constantly surprises you with its boss design. And while some are meh, a lot of them were really fun to play. One boss in particular was easily one of my favorite bosses in the series thus far, but we will touch more upon it later. As I praised on about in the gameplay department, this game is presented beautifully. It runs at a smooth 60 frames per second, and it is also optimized well, as once you set everything up such as controller choice and such like that, it's pretty much set up pretty well. And I should also note, I am playing the PC version, which despite the controversial launch and decisions with it, still managed to overall end up well after some well needed updates and such of that. A big thing I want to touch on in terms of this game is the art style, sprite work, and animation movement. It is all just super smooth and clean, and in some zones it shines out amazingly. The highlights of Sonic Mania visually were both acts of Studiopolis, both acts of Mirage Saloon, Press Garden Act 2, and those free zones respectively, which are all new zones. But it's the returning Stardust Speedway in my eyes that was just great looking in presentation. The coloring, the lighting, other elements were handled so well in that zone and others. But it wouldn't be presentation if we didn't touch on the big thing Mania enthusiasts went crazy for. The animated opening and endings. These were a nice addition to Mania as a way to portray the clear idea of this game. Now, for some elements the opening doesn't fully work for me, due to the coloring being a bit too bright in some ways. I also wasn't feeling the song choice for the opening, as I made it out before that 𝗵𝗿𝗄𝗃 isn't really a group that I really vibe with, and it doesn't feel fitting to Sonic to me, and it would have been cooler to hear a track from 𝗕𝗏𝗋 instead. But these are minor nitpicks to the opening. They're just pieces of my opinion spectrum that don't overlook the overall quality, which is still very clean and very presentable with a fluid style. Not among my favorite openings or endings to a Sonic game, but they are up there. So this brings me to looking at the world of Sonic Mania and how it was done through its zones. Now here's the thing. While this is an area with positives still, this brings me to the game's strongest negative point, the elephant in the room, the nostalgia. Yes, I've talked about this since the day the game was revealed, and I have to reiterate it here for experience purpose. Playing through the game was amazing considering the new level design and some elements and gimmicks mixed up throughout the game, but that doesn't make some moments in the game not feel as exciting due to being similar to previous zones in original games. And that in itself is not a problem since these are old zones and it makes sense for them to be similar to when they were back in the past. But come on, only 4 new zones? This is in my opinion what weakens Mania, because the lack of Mania's own zones only gives it so much to stand on in terms of its own identity, which I feel plays a big part in identifying Sonic games when we look back at it from the future. And while Mania definitely has moments that stand out its identity, it's undeniable how much of its own identity is borrowed from other games. It only has so many zones to make its own impression, and that's the most disappointing element of Mania to me. But here's where things look up for Mania. The saving grace for Mania and its retro stages is that each of the old stages have some new gimmicks, as well as gimmicks mixed in from other classic games. And these additions all felt welcome and actually fun. They gave a fresh coat of paint to these zones that would have otherwise been so generic. All except Green Hill Zone, which the changes to it are so little it felt almost the same. But the big thing to praise again are those all original new zones, which all had unique designs and new elements that were fresh for Sonic. Though I didn't like Titanic Monarch, the last original zone and final stage in the game, fully, it was a fine zone design-wise and all, but it was way too long in some areas and felt like such a drag of a zone at times. Though it is the final zone, so it's to be expected in some ways. Titanic Monarch as well as 𝗿𝗄𝗃 Zone were easily my least favorite zones, but those first 3 new original zones were my favorites in this game. Now the storytelling presentation of this game is meh. I'll be honest and say that again, this is another area where nostalgia, the main negative, comes to bite. The narrative at first starts simple enough in some ways, with Sonic and Tails heading to Angel Island, with no reason really given to them, but I digress. But anyway, we get to the discovery of this gem known as the Phantom Ruby, which is a gem that has powerful time and space properties that rival the Chaos Emeralds themselves. The gem turns the egg robots that found it into the hard-boiled heavies, and they, along with their master Eggman, from there go on to try and conquer the world. And at the end, Sonic comes to a final clash with a rogue hard-boiled heavy leader and Eggman for the Phantom Ruby's control. After defeating them, in the full ending, Sonic gets sucked into a vortex with the Ruby leaving Tails and Knuckles behind. Which is quite the, rough ending. Okay, so I'll talk about the specific ending, the Phantom Ruby, and all that later, because I'm just going to be blunt. The game is basically a prequel to the upcoming Sonic Forces, and in my opinion, this kind of just makes the game identity all the more weird. Having Mania take place in an alternate dimension from the main timeline just to tie into Forces and bring the Sonic from Mania here to Forces is extra stupid beyond words. To make the background story easier, they should have just made Mania its own story in the past that takes place slightly after Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Like we needed alternate dimensions involved in this story. But again, I'll be sure to touch more of that later. So what about the story presentation in Mania itself? It's pretty basic, but at the same time, the one thing I wish the game had done better is a better job at transitions. Some zones have pretty great interesting transitions, such as a simple warp from the Phantom Ruby, or Sonic using Sonic CD's time travel mechanic for a specific example. But other times, things kinda just progress for no reason. One of the biggest things that bothered me personally is like when Knuckles reunites with Sonic and Tails, as well as when the tornado magically just appears. All of this in Mirage Saloon Act 1. It all just kind of happens. Now, it doesn't affect the overall game, and some of these story gripes are admittedly minor. But if you're going to make your game one big excuse to revisit the past, I at least ask that you try to have more flow and have these things just happen. Again, I'm not asking for a movie in full dialogue since it's a retro-style 2D Sonic game, but a little extra work on zone transition and some elements of the story could have been much better, as well as the overall connection to Forces could have been way better than just this. The character in this game is pretty basic and solid. There's not much to say here. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles all are portrayed very nicely for animation and action. But the big thing I love that this game does with our big three is it treats them all as equal in terms of how you can play Mania. From the start, you can choose to play as Sonic and Tails, the dynamic duo, or choose to play as Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles individually. And they all have their own uniqueness in design for how you can play the game. Knuckles in particular even has his own unique sections in Green Hill and Mirage Saloon, and even has unique bosses. But one thing I have to really praise this game for is thank you for actually making Knuckles look like a decent character again. Knuckles even has a boss fight where he successfully defends the Master and remembers how Eggman clearly duped him. This is just so much justice for this character after all the injustice he has received. It's not crystal perfect, seeing as there are times Knuckles still is kind of comic relief, but it's much better than what has been done to him in recent. Tails doesn't stand out as much as Sonic and Knuckles do in some areas, besides being the cute sidekick, but he still can pop a bagnik too again himself, so that's good to see. A big thing that adds to Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles being treated nice and equally is Knuckles and Tails can actually activate their super forms again, also as opposed to Sonic. And they can even face the super form final boss themselves. However, a small problem to this is that sadly, Knuckles and Tails don't get unique endings, with the only way for Knuckles to get a unique ending is through and Knuckles mode, which by the way, is a pretty funny mode. And it's just kind of a nitpick. I would have preferred if Tails and Knuckles did kind of get their own unique endings as opposed to just repeating Sonic's ending, but I guess that also kind of shows how equal they are, so that you don't miss out on the important story detail of Sonic in the ending. What I really want to praise though for characters in this game is the cameos for Team Hooligan. Fang, Bark, and Bean. Their illusion boss fight was beyond amazing, and it straight baffled me to see these characters in any form in a game again. Granted, it sadly wasn't actually them and was just an illusion fight, but just seeing them again in general was dope. The one character I felt I wish kind of got a tad more spotlight was Amy. The best Amy gets in the entire game is a small cameo in one of the Metallic Madness fights, and that's about it. Shame, because it might have been nice if she was maybe a secret 4th unlockable character or something, but her disappearance doesn't lose any points. Overall, the characters in this game were straightforward and nice. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles hitting levels similar to their 2D Prime again, lots of nice references and Easter eggs, and Eggman was pretty creative in his boss fights and overall plan, even though personally I found Eggman in terms of the final fights of the game a bit disappointing. Oh man, the music. You guys know that when it comes to music and Sonic, I find it extremely important because music is an element of Sonic that has made him stand out the most. Many times hitting near godlike levels of quality in terms of sound and design. The game definitely fits up there with the greats in areas. While there were many remixes and the remixes in this game were nicely done, some of them were my favorite iterations of certain songs thus far. But again, there were a lot of remixes, so it's hard to say that Mania has a soundtrack that is very unique. But the new songs, this is the area of Mania that really actually defeated my expectations. I went into this game mostly expecting mostly remixes, that wouldn't do it for me. But the new songs in this game have such a style to them done right. You listen to it and you actually feel like it's from Sonic. Not because it sounds like it came off a Genesis sound font, or because it's clearly an old song from Sonic. It just sounds that good and stylish. And this is what defines Sonic music to me. Style and variety, and it's really good. This is the type of sound direction I like seeing Sonic go. And it's good the music focuses on that as opposed to just making something that sounds retro all the time. Overall, a lot of great songs on this soundtrack. Not every song is a banger, and it is a very upbeat soundtrack, but it does a great job in many areas. Now let's touch some remaining areas of Mania I may not have covered yet. The special stages in this game are divided by two types. When you collect a decent amount of rings and hit a checkpoint post, you can enter a sparkling ring via a la Sonic 2 to enter the blue sphere stages. Completing these stages unlocks bonus things such as the peel out from Sonic CD or the Insta Shield from Sonic Free. It's a neat way to collect bonus content in the game and decent replayability. But I gotta be honest, even though I've beaten a good few blue spear stages in this game, I still don't really like this special stage type, and wished an alternative way to get some of these bonus content rings would be to rebeat the main original stages of Mania. Speaking of which, it leads to these stages. These are an all-new original special stage type that takes inspiration from Sonic R. And honestly, I like these stages. Despite having some difficulty in later parts, they were mostly easy to understand in terms of how they work, and after a while I was able to beat them one by one. Though more of the struggle was the method of activating these stages. Finding the giant rings could be annoying at times and would be if you had to constantly raid every zone to find one. But luckily, an easy way to just stack up emeralds is to just grind one giant ring in a single zone and exit and retry it later for other emeralds, which was really nice and made the game faster paced in my opinion. I would also throw some comments on multiplayer, but unlike many types of games I've played, multiplayer wasn't too big a factor for this time since I was playing on PC. But I will say it was a really nice of the team to add back a multiplayer similar to Sonic 2. And in a way, I kind of wish it had an online mode to play with friends, but it's not required. In the end though, it would have been really cool, but just the fact that they took the time and care to add in a multiplayer mode just like those older games was really nice. In conclusion, Sonic Mania was a pretty solid Sonic game to play, and a well done take to the 2D series. Mania's main refreshing elements come from its creative level design, creative boss design, and just really well-made balanced game design. It just gives the game such a good flow and makes it a generally fun Sonic game to play, and doesn't just make it a chore. Its biggest flaw, however, comes from its heavy roots in the past. If you are a hardcore Sonic fan like me who's played these past games to death, at most certain elements will be neat callbacks, but not everything will be eye-googling. This also affects certain zones where some elements may not hook you, and the game will only be so exciting to you. The lack of new zones in comparison to old was unacceptable in my eyes, especially with these being only 4 when the pre-launch period at least gave us a little hope for more. However, the nostalgia of this game actually has a positive advantage. It is a great place to start as an introduction to Sonic the Hedgehog. The game takes some of, not all, but some of the best moments in the original Sonic Genesis saga, plus Sonic CD. It pushes the design of the zones from those games to full potential almost, and adds a nice coat of paint in terms of visuals. So as a Sonic game in terms of core gameplay and other elements, it does extremely well. Its major point losses come from the reliance on the crutch of the past, the lackluster story presentation, and other small flaws I've beaten in by now. For the final verdict, I say that Sonic Mania is a great game. Basically, this game gets a solid B+ from me. The game has high quality and plenty of positives to bring it up to a great score. While minor issues such as uniqueness and nitpicks are the only thing keeping it from my top ratings, it's a great game, but it's not that revolutionary and mind-blowing, especially in a time period of now. But as a retooled successor to Genesis era Sonic, great stuff. So you're probably wondering what this section is for. It's basically my final thoughts for Sonic Mania as well as its effect towards the future. As I said in a previous video, I predict that if Mania does well enough, it will evolve into a new Sonic sub-series that focuses on retro-style 2D in Sonic. And while I have no problem with that, my big hope is we will still at least see the form of modern style 2D such as Sonic Advance or Sonic Rush in its own game still as well. Not 2D in the main 3D games, and not in this sub-series with 3D. This sub-series can stay focused on the past and elements and improve upon that if it wants to. However, there is one big condition I want to see. From here on, I want to see Sonic expand the series forward even in this sub-series. That means all original stages at the very least. Maybe 1 or 2 throwback stages if they like, but not an entire game where nostalgia takes up most of the game. I also hope the trend of creative bosses in this game continues too. And a big thing I want to see grow slowly is hopefully we see other classic styled characters get involved as well, such as Amy or even something crazy like that. And if nostalgia must return in this sub-series in some form, I'd mainly want to see it in maybe something like a remake of a game we haven't played to death. Like a 𝗃𝗄𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀 reimagining or something, I don't know. I leave that to the hands of the team that did this game, Christian Whitehead and his team, who did a stellar job on this game actually. Also props to 𝗃𝗄𝗃𝗀𝗃 for the soundtrack too. And Sega, please take notes on this game. It's absolutely sad to me it took the fans themselves to show this much passion into Sonic again. And not because of the dang nostalgia they put into the game, but because of the effort that they put into this game. Any game can truly be good if you push its efforts further, and I can just hope to see this kind of effort even in the mainline titles of Sonic in the future again. Especially in the mainline 3D games, as they are as huge a piece to Sonic as they are to the classics, and I hope Sega can just realize that one day. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the review. And if you think I may have missed anything and still want my 2 cents on it, let me know in the comments below. Or you can let me know what you thought of this review, if you had similar thoughts, if you had any disagreements, etc. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new to the channel for more Sonic shenanigans. This is 𝗃𝗄𝗃𝗀𝗃, and I'm out. Peace, guys.